a widow with a deadly secret, a gunslinger running from his past, and one night that would drown them both in blood. When Evelyn Harper's wagon shattered on that dusty Idaho street, she didn't know the broken axle would be the least of her problems. Hidden in her coat pocket was a map worth killing for, a secret that men like Victor Hale would burn entire towns to possess. The stranger watching from the shadows had already killed once for water. Now, as storm clouds gathered and armed riders circled closer, both would face a choice: run or stand and fight for something bigger than survival itself. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wheel gave up without warning. Evelyn Harper had been watching the road ahead, calculating distances the way she'd learned to do over the past year. How many miles to the next town? How much feed remained for the horses? How long before the money ran out completely? She was thinking about all of this when the rear axle cracked like a gunshot, and the entire left side of the wagon dropped with a sickening crunch of wood against stone. The horses screamed and lunged forward. Evelyn grabbed the reins with both hands, her body thrown sideways as crates and belongings tumbled from the wagon bed. She heard glass breaking, cloth tearing, the metallic ring of her husband's old tools scattering across the dirt. "Whoa! Whoa!" Her voice came out hoarse, desperate. The horses finally stopped, flanks heaving 20 feet down the road. Evelyn sat frozen in the tilted driver's seat, one hand still gripping the reins, the other pressed against her chest where her heart hammered like a fist against a door. Around her, the small Idaho town of Brennan's Cross had gone silent. She turned slowly, taking in the scene. The main street was little more than a wide dirt road lined with weathered buildings, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith's forge that looked like it hadn't seen fire in weeks. A handful of townspeople had emerged from doorways and were now standing motionless, watching her with the blank curiosity of people observing something unfortunate that wasn't their concern. No one moved to help. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaking more than she wanted them to. At 55, she was still strong. Years of farm work had seen to that, but the past 12 months had carved something out of her that strength alone couldn't replace. Her husband Thomas had died of fever last summer. The debts he'd left behind had swallowed their savings, then their livestock, then nearly everything else. She'd sold the farm to Thomas's creditors for a fraction of what it was worth, packed what remained into this wagon, and headed west with nothing but a vague plan and the clothes on her back. Now the wagon was broken. She walked around to inspect the damage, already knowing what she'd find. The rear axle had snapped clean through, and the wheel itself was splintered beyond repair. The weight of everything she owned had come down hard on the left corner, crushing 2 crates and sending the rest sliding into a heap. "Ma'am." Evelyn looked up. A man in a dusty jacket and worn hat stood nearby, his expression professionally sympathetic in the way of shopkeepers who smelled potential business. "That's a bad break," he said, nodding toward the wheel. "Cyrus over at the smithy might be able to fix her, but it'll take time, and it won't be cheap." "How much?" Evelyn asked, though she already suspected the answer. The man scratched his jaw. "Hard to say without Cyrus looking at it, but a new axle, the labor, you're probably talking $15, maybe $20. $20. She had $11.30 in the small cloth purse hidden in her coat. That was supposed to get her to Montana, where Thomas's brother had a ranch and had promised, in a letter written 3 months ago, that there might be work for her. "I see," Evelyn said quietly. The man waited as if expecting her to produce money immediately. When she didn't, his expression cooled by a degree. "Well," he said, "you'll want to talk to Cyrus yourself, I expect. His shop's just there." He pointed vaguely toward the blacksmith's forge and walked away. Evelyn stood beside her broken wagon and felt the weight of eyes on her from every direction. A woman in a faded blue dress watched from the general store. 2 men leaning against the saloon porch studied her with the flat measuring gazes of people trying to decide if she was worth the effort of charity. A boy of maybe 10 sat on a fence rail, openly staring. She was a stranger, a woman alone, and in places like this, that made her something worse than invisible. It made her a problem. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Evelyn looked up at the sky and saw dark clouds massing on the western horizon, advancing like an army. The air had that electric heaviness that comes before a storm, the kind that makes animals restless and sets nerves on edge. She needed shelter, she needed help, she needed $20 she didn't have. What she had instead was a secret that could get her killed. Her hand moved unconsciously to her coat pocket, where the folded leather journal rested against her ribs. She didn't need to look at it to know what was inside. She'd read Thomas's notes so many times she could recite them from memory. Geological formations, water table measurements, and a hand-drawn map marking a location on the property she'd just sold, the property she no longer owned, where Thomas had been convinced, absolutely convinced, that a massive underground spring was waiting to be found. Enough water to turn the whole valley green, he'd told her once, eyes bright with the fever that would kill him 3 weeks later. Enough to change everything, Evie. You remember that. If anything happens to me, you remember. She'd thought it was delirium, the dreams of a dying man. But after he passed, when she'd found the journal hidden in his desk drawer, she'd realized Thomas had been planning this for years. He'd studied maps, consulted with a surveyor, spent months documenting water sources and underground formations. He'd believed it completely. And now, standing in this town with a broken wagon and empty pockets, Evelyn wasn't sure what she believed. What she knew was this. 3 weeks ago, a man named Victor Hale had come to the farm with an offer to buy it. His price had been generous, suspiciously generous. When she'd asked why he wanted dried-up farmland in the middle of nowhere, he'd smiled and said something about investing in the future. She'd sold it to him anyway because she'd had no choice. But then, 2 days after signing the deed, she'd overheard 2 of Hale's men talking in town. They'd been drinking, laughing, boasting about the widow's spring and how their boss was going to make a fortune once they found the water. That was when Evelyn had understood. Hale had heard the same rumors Thomas had chased. He'd bought the land not for what it was, but for what it might contain. And if Hale ever learned that Evelyn had the journal, had the map, he would do whatever it took to get it back. She pulled her hand away from her pocket and forced herself to breathe normally. The journal was her insurance, her leverage, but it was also a target painted on her back. If anyone in this town knew what she carried, if word reached Hale, she couldn't think about that now. First things first, shelter. Evelyn gathered what she could from the scattered belongings. A bundle of clothes, a small satchel of food, Thomas's old pistol wrapped in oilcloth. She left the rest where it had fallen and started walking toward the row of buildings. The blacksmith's forge was dark and cold. She knocked twice, got no answer, and moved on. The general store was open, but when she stepped inside and asked the woman behind the counter if there was a boarding house in town, the woman looked her up and down and said, "Mrs. Fletcher sometimes takes in lodgers, but she's particular about who she accepts. You might try the Copper Bell. They rent rooms by the night." The Copper Bell? The saloon. The woman's tone made it clear what she thought of women who stayed in saloons. Evelyn thanked her and left. The Copper Bell stood on the corner of the main street, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Through the windows, she could see the dim interior, tables, a bar, a handful of men drinking even though it was barely past noon. A sign above the door advertised rooms available. Evelyn hesitated on the threshold, then pushed through the door. The conversation inside didn't stop, but it shifted. Eyes turned toward her. Someone coughed. A man at the bar made a comment too low for her to hear, and another man laughed. Behind the bar, a heavy-set man with thinning hair wiped a glass with a stained rag. "Help you?" "I need a room," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. "For the night." $2. $2. A fifth of everything she had left. "That includes supper?" she asked. "It includes a bed and a roof. Supper's extra." Evelyn counted out the money and placed it on the bar. The man took it without comment and produced a tarnished key. "Top of the stairs, second door on the left. Outhouse is around back. You break anything, you pay for it." "Thank you." She took the key and turned toward the stairs, aware of every eye still on her. As she climbed, she heard the conversations below resume, quieter now, speculative. She didn't let herself think about what they might be saying. The room was small and spare, a narrow bed, a cracked wash basin, a single window that looked out over the side alley. The floorboards were warped, and the wallpaper was stained with water damage. But it had a door that locked, and right now that was all that mattered. Evelyn set her belongings on the bed and sat down heavily. Her whole body ached with a tiredness that went beyond the physical. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself feel the full weight of it. The fear, the loneliness, the crushing uncertainty of not knowing what came next. Then she stood up, straightened her shoulders, and began to plan. Tomorrow she would find the blacksmith and negotiate repairs. If she could get the wagon fixed for less than $20, maybe trade labor, or sell something, she might still make it to Montana. If not, she would figure something else out. She always did. Through the window, the storm clouds were closer now, turning the afternoon light gray and green. Thunder rolled again, louder this time. Evelyn was pulling off her boots when she heard the sound of horses in the street below. She moved to the window and looked down. 4 riders had just arrived, their mounts lathered and breathing hard. The men dismounted with the casual confidence of people who owned whatever space they occupied. 3 of them wore dusty range clothes and gun belts. The 4th was dressed in a dark suit and a wide-brimmed hat, his boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dirt road. Evelyn's breath caught. She knew that man. She'd seen him twice before. Once when he'd come to the farm to make his offer, and once in town the day she'd signed the deed. Victor Hale. He was here, in Brennan's Cross. Not looking for her. He couldn't know she was here, but here nonetheless, which meant his men were here too. Evelyn stepped back from the window, her heart suddenly racing again. This was bad. This was very bad. If Hale was in town, if he was asking questions, if anyone mentioned a widow with a broken wagon, she couldn't stay here. Not tonight, maybe not at all. But where could she go? The storm was coming, the wagon was broken. She had no money for a horse, no friends in this place, nowhere to... A knock at the door made her jump. "Yeah?" she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's the barkeep. Got someone here wants a word with you." Evelyn's hand moved to the pistol in her satchel. "Who?" "Says his name's Boone. Silas Boone. Says he saw your wagon break and thought you might need help." She didn't recognize the name. But then, she didn't recognize anyone in this town. "I'm fine," she called back. "Don't need any help." There was a pause. Then a different voice, quieter and deeper than the barkeep's. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble, but if you're planning to stay in this town tonight, there's something you should know about the men who just rode in." Evelyn froze. "I'll be downstairs," the voice continued, "at the back table if you want to hear it." Footsteps retreated down the hall. Evelyn stood motionless, weighing options. It could be a trap, or it could be exactly what it sounded like, a warning from someone who'd seen something she needed to know. Outside, the first fat drops of rain began to hit the window. She picked up the pistol, checked that it was loaded, and slipped it into her coat pocket. Then she unlocked the door and headed downstairs. The saloon had filled up since she'd gone upstairs. More men had come in from the street, shaking rain from their hats and calling for whiskey. The air smelled like wet wool and tobacco smoke. At a table near the bar, Victor Hale sat with 2 of his men, deep in conversation with someone Evelyn didn't recognize, probably a local businessman. Hale hadn't seen her yet. At the back of the room, as far from the bar as possible, a man sat alone. He was maybe 40, lean and weathered, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that looked like it had spent most of its life outdoors. He wore simple range clothes, canvas pants, a faded shirt, a leather vest, and no visible gun, though that didn't mean much. When he saw Evelyn approaching, he didn't smile or nod. He just watched her with calm, measuring eyes. Evelyn pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "You're Boone." "I am." "You said you had something to tell me." "I said I had something you should know." He glanced toward the bar where Hale was still talking. "Those men who rode in, you know who they are?" "I know one of them." Boone's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's so." "Victor Hale. He bought my farm 3 weeks ago." "Then you know what kind of man he is." "I know he pays well and doesn't like being told no." "That's most of it," Boone agreed. "The rest is, he's got a dozen men working for him, and half of them used to ride with outfits that weren't particular about the law. Word is, he's looking for something on that land he bought from you. Something valuable." Evelyn kept her expression neutral. "Where'd you hear that?" "I keep my ears open." He leaned back in his chair, still watching her. And I'm guessing you've got an idea what he's looking for, or you wouldn't be sitting here talking to me instead of pretending I don't exist." She said nothing. Boone studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if she'd confirmed something. "Fair enough. Not my business what you've got or where you're going, but if I were you, I'd get out of this town before Hale figures out you're here. Storm or no storm." "I can't. My wagon's broken." "Then fix it." "I don't have the money." "Then find it." Evelyn felt a flicker of anger. "You got any other advice that doesn't involve things I've already thought of?" For the first time, Boone's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "You could ask me why I'm telling you this." "All right, why are you?" "Because I don't like men like Hale, and I don't like watching people get cornered when they haven't done anything wrong." He paused. "And because I know what it's like to run out of road." The anger faded. Evelyn looked at this stranger, this man who had no reason to care whether she lived or died, and saw something in his face that she recognized, the same tiredness she felt, the same weight. "You've been running," she said quietly. "For a while now." "From what?" "Doesn't matter." He glanced toward the window where rain was now coming down in sheets. "What matters is the storm's getting worse, and Hale's going to start asking questions soon. If he finds out you're here, he's going to want to know why. And if he thinks you've got something he wants—" He didn't need to finish. Evelyn looked across the room at Victor Hale, who was laughing at something one of his men had said. He looked relaxed, confident. A man who got what he wanted. "There's a cabin," Boone said suddenly. "About 2 miles north of town, just off the main road. Abandoned, but the roof's solid. If you need a place to wait out the storm, somewhere Hale won't think to look, you could make it there before dark." "Why would you help me?" "Already told you." "That's not an answer." Boone met her eyes. "Maybe I'm tired of watching people get taken advantage of. Maybe I've got my own reasons. Does it matter?" It should have. Evelyn knew better than to trust strangers offering help for free. But something in the way Boone spoke, the plain, unadorned honesty of it, made her think he was telling the truth, or at least as much of the truth as he was willing to share. "The cabin," she said. "Does it have a barn?" "It's got an old lean-to. Why?" "Because if I go, I'll need to take my horses with me. And I'll need help getting my things from the wagon." Boone considered this. Then he nodded. "All right." "Just like that?" "You want me to argue about it?" Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. "No." "Then we should go now, before this gets worse." He stood and dropped a coin on the table. "I'll get the horses ready. You grab what you need from your room. Meet me out back in 10 minutes. Evelyn wanted to ask more questions, who he was, why he was really doing this, what he stood to gain. But the truth was, she didn't have better options, and the clock was ticking. "All right," she said. She went upstairs, gathered her belongings as quickly as she could, and was halfway back down when she heard Victor Hale's voice cut through the noise of the saloon. "Excuse me, friend. I'm looking for someone. A woman, traveling alone. Older, maybe 50 or so. Would have come through here in the last day or two." Evelyn stopped on the stairs, just out of sight. The barkeep's voice. "What's she to you?" "Business." Hale's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "I bought some land from her recently, and there's a matter of paperwork that needs settling. I'd like to speak with her, that's all." "Haven't seen anyone like that." A pause. Then, "You sure about that?" "Mister, I see maybe 20 people a day in here, and half of them I forget before they're out the door. You want me to remember one woman out of all that?" Another pause, longer this time. Evelyn could picture Hale weighing the barkeep's words, deciding whether to push harder or let it go. "All right," Hale said finally. "But if you do see her, I'd appreciate it if you'd send word. I'm staying at the hotel across the street. There's money in it for you." "I'll keep that in mind." Evelyn didn't wait to hear more. She slipped down the rest of the stairs, moved quickly through the back hallway, and pushed through the rear door into the rain. Boone was waiting with 2 horses already saddled. He didn't ask questions, just helped her tie her belongings to the saddle and swing up onto the mare he'd brought for her. "Your wagon?" he asked. "Leave it. I'll deal with it later." If there was a later. They rode out of town, heading north, keeping to the edge of the road where the trees offered some cover from the downpour. The rain was cold and relentless, soaking through Evelyn's coat within minutes. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to make the horses skittish. Evelyn glanced back once and saw the lights of Brennan's Cross fading into the gray curtain of the storm. Somewhere back there, Victor Hale was asking questions. Somewhere back there, her broken wagon sat in the street like a signpost pointing to where she'd been. But she wasn't there anymore. She turned forward and followed Silas Boone into the storm, trusting a stranger because she had no other choice, carrying a secret that men would kill for, and knowing that by morning, everything would be different. Behind them, lightning split the sky. And in the town they'd left behind, Victor Hale stood on the hotel porch, staring into the rain, and smiled. The cabin appeared through the rain like a ghost materializing from fog, a low, dark shape hunched beneath towering pines, barely visible until they were almost upon it. Silas dismounted first, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent more nights in forgotten places than he cared to count. He tested the door with one hand, found it unlocked, and pushed it open with a creak that sounded like a sigh. "Wait here," he said, then disappeared inside. Evelyn sat on her horse, rain streaming down her face, every muscle in her body aching from the ride. Her hands were numb on the reins. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since they'd left town, and her wet clothes clung to her skin like ice. She watched the dark doorway where Boone had vanished and tried not to think about how completely she'd placed her life in the hands of a man she'd known for less than an hour. A light flickered inside the cabin. Moments later, Boone reappeared in the doorway. "It's clear," he called over the sound of the rain. "There's a lean-to around the side for the horses." They led the animals to the makeshift shelter, 3 walls and a sagging roof that at least kept off the worst of the weather. Boone unsaddled both horses with quick, capable movements while Evelyn gathered their supplies. Her fingers fumbled with the straps, clumsy from cold and exhaustion. "Here." Boone took the bundle from her hands. "Get inside and warm up. I'll finish this." She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, but her teeth were chattering too hard to speak. She nodded and made her way back to the cabin. The interior was sparse but dry. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and Boone had already coaxed a small fire to life using wood from a stack that someone, maybe the last person to shelter here, had left behind. There was a rough table, 2 chairs, and what looked like the remains of a bed frame in the corner. Gaps in the walls led in thin streams of rain, but the roof overhead seemed solid enough. Evelyn stood in front of the fire and held her hands toward the flames, feeling the heat slowly seep back into her fingers. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley like distant artillery. Boone came in a few minutes later, carrying their saddlebags and the bundle of supplies Evelyn had salvaged from the wagon. He set everything down near the fire and shrugged out of his wet coat. "Storm's getting worse," he said. "We'll be here until morning at least." Evelyn nodded, still not quite trusting her voice. She pulled off her own coat and draped it over one of the chairs to dry. Underneath, her dress was soaked through. But there wasn't much she could do about that except stand close to the fire and hope. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled and popped. Rain hammered on the roof. Evelyn found herself studying this stranger in the flickering light, the weathered lines around his eyes, the careful way he moved, like a man accustomed to expecting trouble from any direction. He'd said he was running. From what, she still didn't know. But she recognized the signs now. The absence of excess possessions, the habit of sitting with his back to the wall, the way his eyes tracked toward the door every time the wind shifted. "Why did you really help me?" she asked finally. Boone looked up from the fire. "I told you. You told me you don't like men like Hale. That's not enough of a reason to risk getting involved with someone else's problems." He was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "You're right. It's not. So what's the real reason? Maybe I'm hoping if I help someone else, it'll balance the scales a little." "Balance them against what?" Boone's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Things I can't take back." The way he said it made it clear the subject was closed. Evelyn let it drop. She had her own secrets to keep. She could hardly demand he surrender to his. She opened one of the saddlebags and pulled out the small bundle of food she'd packed. Some dried beef, hard biscuits, a few apples that were starting to soften. Not much, but enough for tonight. She laid it out on the table. Not exactly a feast, she said. I've had worse. Boone took one of the biscuits and bit into it without ceremony. You should eat. You look about ready to fall over. Evelyn wanted to argue, but he was right. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. She took an apple and a piece of the beef and forced herself to chew, even though her stomach felt like a clenched fist. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the storm raged on. Evelyn found herself wondering if Hale was still in town, still asking questions, wondering if the barkeep would remember her after all, or if one of the other townspeople would mention seeing a woman with a broken wagon, wondering how long it would take before someone put the pieces together. This thing Hale's looking for, Boone said suddenly, on your land. Is it real? Evelyn stiffened. What makes you think I know? Because you're running, and you don't strike me as someone who runs unless there's a good reason. She met his eyes across the fire. If I told you it was real, what would you do? Nothing. It's not my business. People have killed for less than nothing. I'm not people. He said it simply, without pride or defensiveness, a statement of fact. You don't have to trust me, Mrs. Harper, but if we're going to be stuck in this cabin together until the storm passes, we might as well be honest about what we're dealing with. Evelyn weighed her options. She could lie, deflect, keep her secrets close, or she could take a chance on the man who'd already risked himself to get her out of town, who'd asked for nothing in return, who was looking at her now with something that might have been respect. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the leather journal. My husband spent 5 years searching for this, she said, setting it on the table between them. He was convinced there was a massive underground spring somewhere on our property, enough water to irrigate the whole valley, maybe more. He drew maps, took measurements, documented everything he could find about the geology and the water table, and then he died before he could prove any of it. Boone didn't reach for the journal. He just looked at it, then back at Evelyn. And you think it's real? I think Thomas believed it was real. And I think Victor Hale believes it too, or he wouldn't have paid 3 times what that land was worth. She paused. 3 weeks ago, I thought it was just my husband's fever dream. Now I'm not so sure. If it is real and Hale gets his hands on it, he'll control the water supply for every homesteader and farmer within 50 miles. He'll charge whatever he wants. People will pay it or watch their crops die. Evelyn's voice was bitter. That's the kind of man he is. Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, So, what's your plan? I don't have one. I was just trying to get away. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. Some plan. Can't even make it one town without everything falling apart. You made it out of town before Hale figured out you were there. That's something. For now. But he's going to keep looking, and eventually someone's going to remember seeing me, or they're going to find my wagon, and he's going to know which direction I went. She rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. I can't outrun him forever. No, Boone agreed. You can't. The bluntness of it stung, but Evelyn appreciated it more than empty comfort would have. She was tired of people telling her everything would work out when she knew damn well it wouldn't. So what do I do? She asked quietly. Boone leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. You've got something he wants, and he's got resources you don't. That's a bad position to be in, but it's not hopeless. Feels pretty hopeless from where I'm sitting. That's because you're thinking like someone who's running away. You need to start thinking like someone who's got leverage. Evelyn frowned. What leverage? He's already got the land. But he doesn't have the map. He doesn't know exactly where to dig. Could take him months, maybe years to find that spring on his own, if he ever finds it at all. Boone's eyes sharpened. That journal is worth more than you think. Question is, what are you willing to do with it? The implication hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. You're saying I should sell it to him. I'm saying you should consider all your options. No. The word came out harder than she'd intended. Thomas spent half his life on this. He wanted that water to help people, not make some land grabber rich. Your husband's dead, Boone said, not unkindly. And you're alive. Might be time to decide which matters more, honoring his memory or surviving the next month. Evelyn stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand. Then help me understand. She paced to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked darkness. Her reflection stared back at her, a tired woman with wet hair and haunted eyes, standing in a stranger's abandoned cabin, fleeing from a man who would take everything she had left if she gave him the chance. When Thomas died, she said quietly, I had nothing. No money, no prospects, no family except a brother-in-law I haven't seen in 10 years. I sold everything we owned just to pay his debts. Everything except this. She touched the pocket where the journal had been. This was the last thing he gave me, the last piece of him that meant something. And now you're telling me I should hand it over to a man like Hale and walk away with whatever scraps he's willing to throw me? I'm telling you that pride is expensive, Boone said, and you might not be able to afford it. Evelyn turned to face him. Is that what you did? When you were running? You gave up the things that mattered to stay alive? Something flickered across Boone's face. Pain, regret, maybe both. Yeah, he said after a moment. I did. And how's that working out for you? I'm still breathing. That's more than some people can say. That's not the same as living. Boone stood and walked to the fire, adding another piece of wood. The flames jumped higher, casting long shadows across the walls. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. You're right, he said. It's not. But sometimes breathing is all you've got, and you take it because the alternative is worse. Evelyn wanted to argue, but she could see the weight of experience in his eyes. Whatever had happened to him in Wyoming, whatever he was running from, it had cost him something he couldn't get back. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the set of his shoulders. She sat back down. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. Boone returned to his chair. You're right to push back. I'm just telling you what I know, not what you should do. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. The fire burned lower. The rain showed no signs of stopping. Finally, Evelyn said, There might be another option. Boone raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. What if I find the spring first, before Hale does? What if I stake a legal claim to the water rights, independent of the land ownership? I sold him the property, but if there's a separate water source that wasn't explicitly included in the sale, you'd need a lawyer for that, and proof that the spring exists. I know someone in Boise who might help with the legal side. And as for proof, she gestured toward the journal. Thomas's notes are detailed. If even half of what he documented is accurate, we could find it. We? The word slipped out before Evelyn had fully thought it through, but now that it was hanging in the air, she realized she meant it. I can't do this alone, she said. I don't know the first thing about surveying or drilling or any of it, but if what you said earlier was true, if you're looking to balance some scales, then maybe this is your chance. Help me find the spring. Help me make sure it goes to people who need it instead of someone who'll use it to bleed them dry. Boone was very still. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking, and I know I don't have any right to ask it, but I'm asking anyway. If Hale finds out what we're doing, he'll come after us. I know. Evelyn leaned forward. But he's going to come after me anyway, whether I help him or not. At least this way, there's a chance something good comes out of it. Boone stared into the fire for a long time. Evelyn watched him wrestle with whatever demons he carried, saw the moment when he made his decision even before he spoke. All right, he said quietly, I'll help you. But we do this smart. No rushing in, no taking stupid risks. We find the spring, we stake the claim, and we get out before Hale knows what happened. Relief flooded through Evelyn so suddenly she felt dizzy. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't done anything but agree to something dangerous and probably foolish. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A flicker of purpose, maybe even hope. Get some rest. We'll head back to your land at first light and see what we're dealing with. What about Hale? If he's still in town, then we'll go around town. It'll take longer, but it's safer. Boone stood and moved toward the door. I'll take first watch. Wake me in a few hours and we'll switch. You don't have to. Yes, I do. If Hale's men are out looking, they might come this direction. Better to know about it before they're on top of us. Evelyn wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She moved to the corner where the old bed frame stood and arranged her coat as a makeshift pillow. The floor was hard and cold, but she'd slept in worse places over the past year. She was drifting off when Boone spoke again from near the door. "Mrs. Harper?" "Evelyn," she murmured. "If we're going to be partners in this fool's errand, you might as well use my name." A pause. Then, "Evelyn, that thing I said earlier about balance, about hoping it would make a difference." "Yeah?" "I meant it." She opened her eyes and looked at him, a shadow against the firelight, watching the darkness beyond the door. "I know," she said. And then she slept. She woke to the sound of horses. For a moment she couldn't place where she was. Then memory flooded back, the storm, the ride, the cabin. She sat up quickly, her body protesting every movement. Boone was at the window, peering through a gap in the boards. The fire had burned down to embers. Through the cracks in the walls, Evelyn could see gray dawn light filtering through the rain, which had diminished to a steady drizzle. "How many?" she whispered. "2 riders, coming up from the south." Boone's voice was calm, but his body was tense. Could be nobody. Could be Hale's men. Evelyn moved to grab the pistol from her saddlebag. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "Stay away from the windows," Boone said. "If they're just passing through, no reason to give them something to notice." They waited in silence as the sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the gap in the boards, she could make out 2 figures on horseback, moving slowly up the muddy trail. They were close enough now that she could see details: long dusters, wide-brimmed hats pulled low against the rain. One of them said something to the other. They both turned to look at the cabin. Evelyn's finger moved to the trigger of her pistol. The riders stopped perhaps 30 yards away. One of them dismounted and started walking toward the cabin, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Boone moved away from the window and positioned himself beside the door, drawing a revolver that seemed to appear in his hand from nowhere. He caught Evelyn's eye and put one finger to his lips. The footsteps outside came closer, stopped just outside the door. A knock. 3 sharp raps. "Anybody home?" Evelyn held her breath. Beside the door, Boone waited with the stillness of a coiled spring. Another knock, harder this time. "We're looking for someone. Woman traveling alone. Might have come this way yesterday. You seen her?" Silence stretched out. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat, the drip of rain from the eaves, the creak of leather as the man outside shifted his weight. "All right then," the voice said finally. "Sorry to bother you." The footsteps retreated. Through the gap, Evelyn saw the man return to his horse and exchange words with his companion. They sat there for another minute, studying the cabin. Then, apparently satisfied, they turned their horses and continued north up the trail. Neither Evelyn nor Boone moved until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. "They'll be back," Boone said, holstering his gun. "Or others like them. Hale's casting a wide net." "How did they know to look here?" "They didn't. They're just checking every shelter and waypoint between here and the next town. Systematic, professional." He moved back to the window. "We need to move. Now." Evelyn quickly gathered their supplies while Boone saddled the horses. The rain had slowed to a light mist, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. They mounted and rode east, away from the main trail, picking their way through pine forest that offered cover but made for slow going. "Where are we headed?" Evelyn asked. "Your land. You said your husband's notes marked the location of the spring?" "A rock formation on the northern edge of the property. Thomas called it Devil's Tooth because of the way it juts up out of the ground." "I know that formation. It's maybe 8 miles from here, but we'll have to circle wide to avoid the main roads." Boone glanced back the way they'd come. "If we're lucky, we've got maybe a day before Hale figures out where you went. 2 days at most. And if we're not lucky, then we'd better hope we're good at running." They rode hard for the next several hours, staying off the trails and keeping to the cover of trees wherever possible. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Rolling hills covered in sage and wildflowers, stands of pine and aspen, distant mountains still capped with snow despite the late spring warmth. In other circumstances, Evelyn might have appreciated it. Now it just felt like terrain to cross before the men with guns caught up. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses near a small creek. Evelyn knelt and filled her canteen while Boone kept watch from a small rise. "We're about 2 miles out," he called down. "Another hour and we'll be on your property." Evelyn climbed up to join him. From this vantage point, she could see for miles, the valley spreading out below them, the ribbon of road cutting through the grassland, and in the distance, a thin column of smoke rising from what she knew was the farmhouse. Her farmhouse. Hale's farmhouse now. "Someone's there," Boone observed. "Probably Hale's men. He said he was going to develop the land." The words tasted bitter. "Looks like he wasn't wasting any time." "That's going to complicate things. If they're working the property, they might see us." Devil's Tooth is on the far northern edge, away from the main buildings. If we come in from the east and stay low, we should be able to get close without being spotted. Boone studied the terrain, then nodded. "All right, but we go slow and careful. First sign of trouble, we pull back. Understood?" "Understood." They remounted and continued on, angling northeast to approach the property from its most remote corner. As they got closer, Evelyn felt a strange mixture of emotions. This land had been hers for 23 years. She'd watched Thomas break his back trying to coax crops from the stubborn soil. She'd buried 2 children in the small cemetery on the South Hill when fever took them before they'd seen their 5th birthdays. She'd said goodbye to Thomas himself beneath the cottonwood tree he'd planted the year they were married, and now it belonged to someone else. The rock formation came into view just as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time all day. It rose from the earth like a broken fang, 30 feet of striated stone thrust up at an angle, surrounded by scrub brush and boulders. Evelyn had seen it countless times over the years and never thought much of it, just another piece of the landscape. Now it looked like salvation or disaster, maybe both. They dismounted 100 yards out and approached on foot, leading the horses. Boone moved like a scout, his eyes constantly scanning for movement or signs of other people, but the area seemed deserted. At the base of the formation, Evelyn pulled out Thomas's journal and opened it to the pages she'd memorized. There was a sketch of Devil's Tooth from multiple angles, annotated with measurements and notes in her husband's careful handwriting. Below that, a more detailed diagram showing what he believed was happening beneath the surface. Underground water channels, limestone formations, the theoretical location of the spring itself. "He thought it was about 40 feet down," she said, tracing the diagram with her finger. "Right here, where the rock meets the soil. He said there'd be specific geological markers, a layer of red clay over limestone, possibly some sandstone in between." Boone knelt and examined the ground. "We'd need to dig to know for sure, and we don't have time for that, not with Hale's men this close." "There might be another way." Evelyn flipped to another page. Thomas wrote about surface indicators, places where the water table is high enough that it affects the vegetation or the soil composition. He marked several spots where he found evidence. "Show me." They spent the next hour walking the area around Devil's Tooth, comparing Thomas's notes to the actual terrain. Evelyn found herself seeing the land through her husband's eyes, the way certain plants grew more thickly in some areas, the subtle depressions in the ground that might indicate underground water flow, the color variations in the exposed rock face. It was Boone who noticed the crack. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a fissure in the rock about 3 feet above ground level. It was narrow, maybe an inch wide, but it ran vertically for several feet. "Feel the air." Evelyn leaned close. There was a faint coolness emanating from the crack, and when she put her hand near it, she could feel moisture. "It's damp," she said, her heart beginning to race, "and cold." Boone pulled out his knife and carefully worked it into the crack, probing the depth. "There's space behind here. Could be a cavity, could be a channel." He withdrew the knife and examined the blade. "Look." The steel was wet, and when Evelyn touched it, her fingers came away dripping. "Water," she breathed. "Could just be runoff from the rain," Boone cautioned, "but combined with everything else your husband documented. It's here." Evelyn felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name, grief, vindication, hope all mixed together. Thomas was right. It's really here. We still need proof. Real proof, not just a wet crack in a rock. Then we dig. With what? We don't have tools, and even if we did, there's a tool shed by the old barn. I know where Thomas kept the surveying equipment. Evelyn was already moving, the exhaustion of the past 2 days burning away in the face of possibility. If we can just get some measurements, confirm the water table depth, we can take that to a lawyer and... Boone caught her arm. "Evelyn, stop." Something in his tone made her freeze. She followed his gaze toward the farmhouse, visible now in the distance. 3 riders were heading their way. "Did they see us?" she whispered. "I don't know, but we can't risk staying here." Boone was already moving back toward the horses. "We need to go. Now." "But the spring will still be here tomorrow. We won't be if we get caught." Evelyn took one last look at Devil's Tooth, at the crack in the stone where water had seeped through, at the proof that Thomas's faith had been justified. Then she turned and ran. They reached the horses just as shouts rang out from the direction of the farmhouse. The riders had spotted them. "Right east!" Boone swung into his saddle. "Stay low and stay fast." They galloped away from Devil's Tooth, away from the spring, away from everything Evelyn had hoped to accomplish. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. She risked a glance back and saw all 3 riders now, pushing their horses hard, closing the distance. "They're gaining!" she shouted. "I know! Just keep going!" They crashed through brush and leaped over a dry wash. One of the riders fired a shot that went wide. Then another, closer this time. "There!" Boone pointed toward a dense stand of trees ahead. "If we can make it to the forest, we can lose them." But they were running out of room. The riders were less than 100 yards behind now, close enough that Evelyn could hear them shouting to each other. One of them fired again, and this time the bullet kicked up dirt just to her left. They hit the tree line at full gallop and plunged into shadow. Branches whipped at Evelyn's face. The horse beneath her stumbled on hidden roots but recovered. Boone was ahead of her, weaving between trunks, choosing a path that seemed random but must have had some logic to it. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly. The trees were too dense for the riders to maintain their speed. "Keep going," Boone called back. "Don't stop." They rode for another 10 minutes before Boone finally pulled up in a small clearing. Both horses were lathered and breathing hard. Evelyn's hands were shaking on the reins. "Did we lose them?" she gasped. Boone listened intently. "For now, but they know what direction we're heading. They'll keep looking." "What do we do?" Before he could answer, a new sound reached them. More horses coming from a different direction. Lots of them. Boone's face went pale. "That's not the same 3. That's a hunting party," Evelyn finished, understanding flooding through her with cold certainty. "Hale must have called in everyone he has." They stared at each other across the small clearing. The sounds of horses were coming from multiple directions now, forming a loose net that was drawing tighter by the minute. "We can't outrun them all," Boone said quietly. "There are too many." Evelyn thought of the spring, so close and yet impossibly far. She thought of Thomas's journal in her pocket, of the secret that had brought them this far and would get them killed if they didn't do something. "Then we don't run," she said. Boone looked at her sharply. "What?" "We can't outrun them, and we can't hide forever, so we stop running." She met his eyes. "We go to the sheriff." "The sheriff works for Hale." "Maybe. Or maybe he's just a man trying to do his job in a town where someone with money has too much influence." Evelyn surprised herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Either way, if Hale's men kill us out here, no one will ever know. But if we make it to town, if we make this public, there are witnesses, laws. Things Hale can't control completely." Boone shook his head. "You're betting your life that the law will protect you from a man who owns half the county." "What choice do we have?" The sounds of the hunting party were getting closer, minutes, maybe less, before they were found. Boone cursed under his breath. Then he said, "All right, we ride for Brennan's Cross. Stay together, stay fast, and pray your faith in the law isn't misplaced." They broke from the trees and ran. The ride back to Brennan's Cross was a blur of pounding hooves and ragged breathing, every muscle in Evelyn's body screaming as she pushed her exhausted horse harder than she'd ever pushed an animal in her life. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit never quite faded, sometimes closer, sometimes more distant, but always there, like wolves tracking wounded prey through the wilderness. Boone rode beside her, occasionally glancing back to gauge the distance between them and Hale's men. His face was set in grim determination, and Evelyn noticed he'd drawn his revolver and was holding it ready across his saddle. She'd pulled out Thomas's old pistol as well, though she had no illusions about her ability to hit anything from the back of a galloping horse. They crested a rise, and Brennan's Cross came into view below them, its collection of weathered buildings looking simultaneously like salvation and a trap. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved along the main street, normal life continuing, unaware that two desperate riders were about to bring violence to their doorstep. "The sheriff's office!" Evelyn shouted over the thunder of hooves. "Where is it?" "East end of town," Boone pointed. "White building with the bars on the windows." They plunged down the slope toward the town, scattering rocks and dust. Behind them, someone fired a shot that went wide, the crack of the rifle echoing across the valley. Townspeople on the street stopped and stared. A woman grabbed her child and pulled him into a doorway. Evelyn's horse stumbled on the edge of town, nearly going down, but recovered at the last second. She fought to keep her seat as they thundered onto the main street, past the general store, past the Copper Bell Saloon, past startled faces and pointing fingers. The sheriff's office appeared ahead, a small, whitewashed building with iron bars on a single window and a faded sign hanging above the door. Boone hauled his horse to a sliding stop in front of it and was out of the saddle before the animal had fully halted. "Inside!" he barked. "Now!" Evelyn half fell from her horse and stumbled toward the door. Boone was already there, throwing it open. They burst inside together just as the sound of multiple horses reached the edge of town. The office was sparse. A desk, 2 cells in the back, a gun rack on the wall. Behind the desk, a man in his 40s looked up from paperwork with an expression that quickly shifted from surprise to alarm. He was lean and gray-haired, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that took in the scene with practiced assessment. A tin star was pinned to his vest. "What in hell?" he began. "Sheriff Collins." Boone moved to the window, peering through the bars. "We need your protection. Victor Hale's men are hunting us, and they're not planning to bring us in peacefully." The sheriff stood slowly, his hand moving toward the gun on his hip. "Silas Boone, heard you were in town. Heard some other things, too." "Whatever you heard can wait. Right now you're going to tell me why Hale's men are chasing you through my town with guns drawn." Evelyn stepped forward, still clutching the pistol. "Because I have something he wants. Something I won't give him." Collins's eyes shifted to her, and recognition flickered across his face. "You're the woman from yesterday, the one with the broken wagon. Hale was asking about you." "I know what he was asking, and I know he's probably offered you money to look the other way if he finds me." The sheriff's expression hardened. "I don't take bribes, Mrs. Harper. Evelyn Harper." She set the pistol down on his desk, a gesture of trust she wasn't sure was warranted. "And I'm not saying you do. I'm saying Hale has influence in this town, and I need to know if you're going to enforce the law or let him enforce his own version of it." Outside, the sound of horses had stopped. Voices shouted in the street. Evelyn could hear boots hitting the ground, the metallic click of rifles being cocked. Collins looked from Evelyn to Boone, then to the window where shadows were gathering. His jaw tightened. "How many?" "At least a dozen," Boone said. "Maybe more." "And what exactly did you do to warrant this much attention?" "I found proof of something on land that used to be mine. Land I sold to Hale 3 weeks ago. Something valuable enough that he wants to make sure I don't tell anyone about it." "What kind of proof?" Evelyn pulled the journal from her coat and set it beside the pistol. "Water. A massive underground spring. My husband spent years documenting it. Hale bought the land because he heard the rumors, but he doesn't know exactly where to find it. This journal does." Collins stared at the journal like it was a live rattlesnake. "You're telling me Hale brought a hunting party to my town over a water claim?" "I'm telling you that water is worth more than gold in this valley, and Hale knows it. If he controls that spring, he controls every farmer and homesteader for 50 miles. Evelyn met the sheriff's eyes. "My husband wanted that water to help people. Hale wants it to own them. I'm asking you to help me make sure it's used the right way." The sheriff was silent for a long moment. Outside, footsteps approached the office. Then a voice, smooth, cultured, and utterly confident, called out, "Sheriff Collins, I need a word." Collins cursed under his breath. "That's Hale." "Don't let him in," Evelyn said quietly. "Please." The sheriff looked at her, then at Boone, then at the journal on his desk. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made, a line being drawn. "Both of you, in the back cell, now." "What?" Boone started. You want my protection, you're getting it, but I do this by the book. You're in protective custody until I sort this out. Move. They had no choice. Boone and Evelyn went into the rear cell and Collins locked the door behind them. Then he walked to the front door and opened it. Victor Hale stood on the threshold, flanked by 4 armed men. He was immaculate despite the hard ride, his suit barely dusty, his hat at a perfect angle. When he smiled at the sheriff, it didn't reach his eyes. "Sheriff, thank you for your time." "Mr. Hale, you want to tell me why your men are riding through town like they're hunting outlaws?" "Because we are hunting an outlaw, or rather, a thief." Hale's gaze drifted past Collins toward the cells in the back. His smile widened when he saw Evelyn. "Hello, Mrs. Harper. I've been looking for you." Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes without flinching. "She's in protective custody," Collins said flatly, along with her companion. "Protective custody? How convenient." Hale turned his attention back to the sheriff. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that a dozen armed men were chasing 2 unarmed civilians into my town. That makes it my business." "The woman has stolen property that belongs to me." "That's so. What property would that be?" Hale gestured toward the desk. "That journal, for one thing. It contains information about the land I purchased from her, information she failed to disclose during the sale. That makes it rightfully mine." "The journal belonged to my husband," Evelyn called from the cell. "I never sold it. It's mine." "Your husband's research was conducted on property you subsequently sold. Any discoveries made on that land belong to the current landowner, which is me." Hale's voice was patient, reasonable. "I'm willing to be generous, Mrs. Harper. I'll pay you fairly for the journal and any inconvenience this has caused. But I will have what's mine." "It's not yours," Evelyn said, "and it never will be." Hale's smile finally faded. "Sheriff, I'm asking you nicely to release that woman into my custody. If you refuse, I'll go over your head. I have friends in Boise who—" "I don't give a damn about your friends in Boise." Collins crossed his arms. "Right now, you're in my town, and in my town we have a process. If you think Mrs. Harper has stolen from you, you file a complaint. I'll investigate, and if there's merit to it, a judge will decide. That's how the law works. The law also says a man has the right to recover his stolen property." "It does, but it doesn't say he can form a lynch mob to do it." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Hale's men shifted their positions, hands drifting toward their weapons. Collins didn't move, but Evelyn could see the calculation in his eyes. 4 armed men in front of him, possibly more outside, and him standing alone. From the cell, Boone spoke quietly. "Sheriff, behind you, gun rack." Collins didn't turn, but Evelyn saw him register the comment. If shooting started, he might be able to reach the rifles on the wall. Might. "Mr. Hale," Collins said carefully, "I'm asking you and your men to leave. File your complaint in the morning and we'll handle this properly. And if I don't, then we'll have a problem." The silence stretched out like piano wire pulled to the breaking point. Evelyn held her breath. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this entire situation would explode into violence. It was Hale who blinked first. "Very well, Sheriff, I'll file the complaint. But I'm also posting men outside this office. If Mrs. Harper tries to leave, my men will detain her until the judge arrives. That's within my rights." "It is. As long as your men understand they're not to interfere with my duties or enter this office without permission." "They understand." Hale adjusted his hat and gave Evelyn one last look. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mrs. Harper. When this is resolved legally and you've lost any claim to sympathy, sleep well." He turned and walked out. His men followed, though not before giving Collins hard looks that promised future trouble. The sheriff waited until the sound of boots had faded, then closed and locked the door. He stood there for a moment, his back to the cell, his shoulders tight with tension. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Boone observed. Collins turned around. "Probably both, and now I need to know if I just put my neck on the line for a good reason or a bad one." He walked to the cell and looked at Evelyn through the bars. "Tell me the truth, Mrs. Harper. All of it. Because if Hale files that complaint in the morning and I have to defend keeping you here, I need to know exactly what I'm defending." Evelyn took a breath and told him everything. About Thomas's obsession with finding the spring, about the journal and the maps, about selling the farm to Hale, and only learning afterward that he'd been hunting the same thing. About finding the crack in the rock at Devil's Tooth, the proof that water was there, waiting to be claimed. When she finished, Collins was quiet for a long time. Your husband really believed there was enough water down there to irrigate the whole valley? He staked his reputation on it, and his life, in a way. The stress of searching, of trying to prove it, of dealing with people who thought he was crazy, it wore him down, made him vulnerable to the fever that killed him. Evelyn's voice caught. But he was right. I saw it today. The water is there. But you don't own the land anymore. No, but the water rights might be separate. If I can stake a claim to the spring as an independent resource, if I can get it legally protected before Hale finds it and locks it up for himself. That's a big if, Collins interrupted. Water law in this territory is complicated, and going up against someone like Hale in court, with his lawyers and his money, I know the odds, but I have to try. The sheriff rubbed his face, suddenly looking older and more tired. You know what's going to happen here, don't you? Hale will file his complaint. He'll bring in his lawyers. They'll argue that anything discovered on his land belongs to him, and they'll probably win. And even if they don't, even if by some miracle you get the water rights, Hale will make your life hell. He'll tie you up in legal battles for years. I don't care, Evelyn said quietly. Let him try. At least people will know the truth. At least there'll be a public record of what he's doing and why. Collins looked at her with something that might have been respect. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolhardy. Can it be both? Despite everything, the sheriff almost smiled. Then his expression sobered. There's something else you need to know. Something about your friend here. Evelyn glanced at Boone, who had gone very still. There's a bounty on Silas Boone, Collins continued. Out of Wyoming. $500 for the man who killed a rancher named Pike Garrett 3 years ago. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She turned to Boone, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything that would make this less real. Boone met her eyes steadily. It's true. You said you shot someone. You didn't say there was a bounty. Would it have changed anything? I don't know, maybe. Evelyn felt betrayal twist in her chest. You've been lying to me from the start. I never lied. I told you I killed a man in Wyoming. I told you I was running. I just didn't tell you all the details. Details like murder? It wasn't murder. Boone's voice was flat, emotionless. Garrett was a water baron. He controlled 3 rivers and charged farmers so much they couldn't afford to irrigate their crops. People were going hungry, losing their land. A group of families asked him to negotiate, and he had his men run them off with guns. Killed a man named Jensen who was just trying to feed his kids. So you killed him. I did. Shot him on the steps of his own house while his hired guns watched. Then I rode away, and I've been writing ever since. Collins cleared his throat. The bounty says murder. Doesn't mention any of that context. It wouldn't, Boone said bitterly. Garrett had friends in the territorial government, men who benefited from his monopoly on water. Of course they called it murder. Evelyn wanted to rage at him, to accuse him of using her, of putting her in even more danger than she was already in. But looking at his face, at the weariness and the old pain etched into every line, she saw something that stopped her. She saw a mirror of herself. Someone who'd lost everything fighting against people with more power, more money, more of everything that mattered in the world's eyes. Someone who'd made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. Why did you really help me? She asked quietly. Boone was silent for a moment. Then, because when I saw you standing next to that broken wagon, watching people walk by without helping, I saw everyone I couldn't save in Wyoming. Every family that lost their farm, every kid who went hungry, every person crushed under the weight of someone else's greed. And I thought, maybe this time I could do something that mattered. Maybe I could help one person instead of just running. And the fact that I was fighting the same kind of man you killed, that was just coincidence? No, Boone admitted. That was why I knew I had to help, because maybe this time we could beat him the right way, without anyone dying, without me becoming what Garrett was. The cell was quiet, except for the distant sounds of Hale's men setting up positions outside the building. Evelyn studied Boone's face and made a choice. "Sheriff," she said, "that bounty, are you going to collect it?" Collins looked between them, his expression unreadable. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're telling me the truth about Garrett, on whether Boone here is really trying to do right by you, or if he's got his own angle, and on whether I believe that enforcing one law means breaking another." "I don't understand." "The bounty says to bring him in alive or dead, but the way I see it, Boone hasn't broken any laws in my jurisdiction. And right now he's in protective custody, same as you, which means it's my job to keep him safe." Collins pulled out his keys and unlocked the cell door. "But that protection only extends so far as I can enforce it. If Hale brings in a bounty hunter or a U.S. Marshal with proper paperwork, I won't be able to stop them." Boone stepped out of the cell, flexing his hands. "How long do we have?" "If Hale knows who you are, not long. He'll use that bounty as leverage, maybe bring in someone to collect it just to get you out of the way." The sheriff moved to his desk and picked up the journal. "Which means if you're going to do something about this water claim, you need to do it fast." "We can't stake a claim without surveying the site," Evelyn protested. "And we can't survey with Hale's men watching our every move." "No, you can't," Collins agreed. "But there might be another way." He opened a drawer and pulled out a territorial map, spreading it across his desk. "Water rights law says that if you can prove a water source exists and that it serves the public good, you can file for protection even on land you don't own. But you need documentation, geological surveys, water table measurements, proof that the source is substantial enough to qualify." "My husband's journal has all that." "Maybe, but Hale's lawyers will argue it's biased, that it's not professional surveying. What you need is an independent expert to verify the findings." "Where am I going to find an expert who'll go against Hale?" Collins tapped a spot on the map. "Boise. There's a geological surveyor named Marcus Webb. Does work for the territorial government sometimes, but he's independent, known for being honest, even when the truth doesn't favor the people paying him." "How long would it take to get to Boise and back?" 2 days hard riding, 3 if you're being careful." "We don't have 3 days," Boone said. "Hell, we might not have one." "Which is why you're not going." Collins looked at Evelyn. "You are. Alone. Tonight. I can't leave Boone here. You have to. If you both disappear, Hale will send his whole force after you. But if Boone stays visible, draws attention, Hale will focus on him and not realize you're gone until it's too late." Evelyn felt ice in her stomach. "You're asking him to be bait." "I'm asking him to give you a chance," Collins corrected. "And I'm promising to keep him alive while you're gone. I'll put him in the cell, claim I'm holding him on the Wyoming warrant. That'll satisfy Hale for now and keep the bounty hunters at bay for a day or 2. Boone nodded slowly. "It could work." "It's too dangerous," Evelyn protested. "Everything about this is dangerous," Boone said. "But Collins is right. This is the best shot we have at making this work." He turned to the sheriff. "You're putting yourself on the line for us." "Why?" Collins was quiet for a moment. "Because 20 years ago, I watched a land speculator buy up half the county I was working in, watched him squeeze farmers until they had nothing left, then take their land for pennies. I was young, thought I could stand up to him through the law. He had me removed from my position, blacklisted across 3 counties. He looked at the journal on his desk. I eventually found work here, in a town too small for him to care about. But I never forgot what it felt like to be powerless while someone with money destroyed good people's lives. I won't watch it happen again, not if I can stop it." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you. Thank me when this is over and we're all still breathing." Collins moved to a cabinet and pulled out a gun belt. "You'll need this. And a fresh horse. Yours won't make it to Boise in the shape it's in. I've got a sorrel in the stable that's fast and has stamina. Take her." "What about Hale's men outside?" "There's a back way out of the stable, comes out in the alley behind the general store. If you leave after midnight, when most of them are sleeping, you should be able to slip past." He handed her the gun belt. "Stay off the main road. Use game trails and stay in the trees as much as possible. And whatever you do, don't stop until you reach Boise." Evelyn buckled the gun belt, feeling the weight of the revolver against her hip. It should have felt wrong, a 55-year-old widow wearing a gun like an outlaw, but instead it felt necessary, honest even. She turned to Boone. "If something happens, Nothing's going to happen. You get to Boise, you find Webb, you get him to verify the journal. Then you come back and we finish this." His eyes were steady on hers. "I'll be here when you get back." "You better be." "I will. I promise." Evelyn wanted to say more, to thank him, to apologize for doubting him, to tell him that somehow in the chaos of the past 2 days, he'd become important in a way she hadn't expected. But the words stuck in her throat, and besides, there wasn't time. Collins was already packing supplies into a saddlebag, dried meat, biscuits, a canteen, matches. "There's a trading post about 15 miles southeast of here. Man named Hoskins runs it. Tell him I sent you, and he'll let you rest the horse and resupply if you need to." "I will." The sheriff checked his pocket watch. "It's 7 now. Get some rest. I'll wake you at 11:30, and you can be gone by midnight. Boone and I will keep watch until then." They spent the next few hours in tense silence. Collins sat at his desk, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. Boone returned to the cell, voluntarily this time, and lay on the cot with his eyes closed, though Evelyn could tell he wasn't sleeping. She tried to rest but found it impossible. Every sound from outside made her jump: boots on the boardwalk, horses shifting in the street, low voices conferring. At 11:15, Collins stood and extinguished most of the lamps, leaving just enough light to see by. He opened the back door that led to a narrow passage running between buildings. "Time to go," he said quietly. Evelyn stood, her heart hammering. She picked up the saddlebag and slung it over her shoulder, then tucked the journal inside her coat. Boone had risen from the cot and stood at the cell bars. In the dim light, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. "Evelyn," he said. She walked to the cell. "Yeah?" "When this is over, when you've got the claim and the water is protected, don't come back here." The words felt like a punch. "What?" "I mean it. Take whatever legal documents you get and go straight to the territorial capital. File everything publicly. Make it official. Don't give Hale a chance to intercept you on the road." "But you'll be—" "I'll handle Hale. I'll handle the bounty. But you need to promise me you'll finish this, no matter what happens here. I'm not leaving you to— Promise me." His voice was fierce now, urgent. "This is bigger than me, bigger than both of us. That water could change everything for people in this valley. Don't let it die because you came back to help someone who knew what he was signing up for." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "I can't just abandon you." "You're not abandoning me. You're honoring what we started together. You're making sure Thomas's work meant something. You're being exactly who I knew you were when I first saw you standing by that broken wagon, someone who doesn't quit, even when everything falls apart." She reached through the bars and gripped his hand. "You're a good man, Silas Boone, whatever they say you did in Wyoming. I'm a man trying to be good. That's all any of us can do." "Mrs. Harper," Collins called softly from the back door, "we need to go." Evelyn squeezed Boone's hand once more, then released it, and turned away before she could change her mind. She followed Collins through the dark passage to the stable behind the sheriff's office. The sorrel mare was already saddled, stamping impatiently. Collins helped Evelyn secure the saddlebag and checked the cinch one last time. The back way leads through 2 alleys and comes out at the edge of town. After that, head southeast toward the river. Follow it for about 3 miles, then cut east toward the mountains. That'll keep you away from the main road." "I understand." "Webb's office is on Market Street in Boise. Tell him I sent you and tell him everything. He's a straight shooter. He'll help if he can." Evelyn swung into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, eager to run. Through the stable walls she could hear muffled voices. Hale's men, still watching the front of the sheriff's office. "One more thing," Collins said, handing her a folded paper. "If you get stopped, show them this. It's a letter saying you're traveling on official business for my office. Might not help, but it won't hurt. Thank you, Sheriff, for everything. Just make it count, Mrs. Harper. Make all of this count." He opened the rear stable door, and Evelyn rode into the night. The alley was narrow and dark, forcing her to navigate by feel as much as sight. She kept the horse to a walk, wincing at every hoof fall that echoed off the wooden buildings. Somewhere ahead, she could hear the murmur of the river. She emerged from the alleys at the eastern edge of town and paused, looking back. The main street was visible from here. The yellow glow of lamps, the silhouettes of men standing guard outside the sheriff's office. One of them laughed at something, the sound carrying clear across the quiet night. In one of those cells, Silas Boone was preparing to face whatever came next. Alone. Because of her. Evelyn turned the horse away and urged it into a trot, then a canter, then finally a full gallop as the open country swallowed her. The night air was cold against her face, and the sky above was brilliant with stars. She rode southeast toward the river, toward Boise, toward the slim hope that the law might protect what greed sought to claim. Behind her, Brennan's Cross faded into darkness, and in the sheriff's office, Victor Hale stood on the front steps, watching the eastern horizon with eyes that missed nothing. "She's running," he said to the man beside him. The man, tall, scarred, with the patient eyes of a professional hunter, nodded. "Want me to follow?" Hale smiled. "Not yet. Let her think she's gotten away. Let her lead us to whoever she's running to." He turned back toward the office where Collins and Boone waited. "In the meantime, we'll apply pressure here. See what breaks first, the sheriff's resolve or the gunfighter's nerve." The bounty hunter's smile matched Hale's. "And when she comes back?" "When she comes back, we'll be ready. And this time, she won't leave until I have everything I want." He descended the steps and walked back toward his hotel, already planning his next move in a game he'd never lost. The night deepened, and the storm that had threatened earlier finally broke across the valley, drenching everything in rain. And Evelyn rode on, carrying Thomas's journal and all their hopes into the darkness. The rain caught Evelyn 20 miles outside Brennan's Cross, a cold deluge that turned the trail into mud and reduced visibility to mere yards. She pulled her coat tighter and kept riding, trusting the sorrel mare to find footing in the darkness. Lightning fractured the sky periodically, offering brief snapshots of the landscape, twisted junipers, rocky outcroppings, the silver ribbon of the river to her left. By the time she reached Hoskins' trading post, it was nearly 3 in the morning and she was soaked to the bone. The post was a squat log structure with a lean-to stable and a hand-painted sign barely visible in the rain. A single lamp burned in the window. Evelyn dismounted stiffly, every muscle screaming, and led the horse under the lean-to's shelter. Before she could knock, the door opened and a barrel-chested man in suspenders appeared, holding a rifle. "State your business," he said, not unkindly. "Sheriff Collins sent me. Said you might let me rest the horse and get warm." The man's expression shifted. He lowered the rifle. "Collins, eh? That old dog still keeping the peace in Brennan's Cross?" "He is, and risking his neck to do it." Hoskins studied her for a moment, taking in her wet clothes and exhausted face. "Come on in. I'll see to your horse." The interior of the trading post was warm and cluttered. Shelves stocked with supplies, furs hanging from the rafters, a potbelly stove radiating heat. Hoskins's wife, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, appeared from a back room and immediately began fussing over Evelyn, draping a blanket around her shoulders and pressing a cup of hot coffee into her hands. "You look half dead, dear. When's the last time you slept?" Evelyn tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the morning before." "Well, you'll rest here for a few hours. No sense killing yourself trying to reach Boise if you fall off your horse from exhaustion halfway there." Evelyn wanted to argue, to say she didn't have time, but her body betrayed her. The warmth of the stove, the weight of the blanket, the simple kindness of these strangers, it all combined to drag her down into sleep before she could protest. She woke to daylight streaming through the window and the smell of bacon frying. Hoskins was at the stove, and his wife was setting the table. The clock on the wall read 7:30. "I need to go," Evelyn said, sitting up too quickly and immediately regretting it as her head spun. "You need to eat first," Mrs. Hoskins said firmly. "Won't take but 10 minutes, and you'll ride better with food in your belly." They fed her bacon, eggs, and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after days of dried beef and hard biscuits. While she ate, Hoskins spread a map on the table. "Collins didn't say why you're heading to Boise, and I'm not asking. But if you're trying to avoid attention, you'll want to stay off the main road from here on. There's a canyon route that'll add a few hours, but keeps you out of sight." He traced the path with a thick finger. "Harder riding, but safer." "Thank you. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. Collins has done me favors over the years. Consider it paid forward." He folded the map and handed it to her. "But I'll give you some advice for free. Whatever you're running from or toward, be careful. There's been riders passing through the last few days asking questions. Professional men, if you know what I mean." What kind of questions? Looking for a woman traveling alone. Offering money for information. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. I didn't tell them anything, and I won't. But others might not be so particular. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. How long ago? Yesterday afternoon, headed east toward Boise. So Hale had already sent men ahead, probably guessing where she was going, maybe knowing about Webb. The net was tightening faster than she'd expected. She finished her breakfast quickly, thanked the Hoskins family, and rode out into a morning that was clear and cold after the storm. The sorrel mare was rested and eager, covering ground with long, easy strides. The canyon route was indeed harder, narrow switchbacks that forced her to dismount and lead the horse, rocky terrain that required constant attention. But it was also beautiful in a harsh way, and more importantly, it was empty. She saw no other travelers all morning. By early afternoon, she was descending out of the high country toward the valley where Boise sprawled. The territorial capital was visible in the distance, a collection of buildings that looked almost cosmopolitan compared to Brennan's Cross. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. The river that ran through the center of town glinted in the sunlight. Evelyn paused on a ridge overlooking the city, suddenly aware of how she must look. Dusty, trail-worn, a middle-aged woman riding alone with a gun on her hip. Not exactly the image that would inspire confidence in a professional surveyor, but there was no help for it. She urged the horse down the final slope into town. Boise was busier than any place Evelyn had been in years. Wagons clogged the main streets. People hurried along boardwalks, conducting business. She passed a bank, a newspaper office, a courthouse with white columns. The air smelled like wood smoke and possibility. Market Street was in the commercial district, lined with offices and respectable establishments. She found Webb's surveying office on the second floor of a brick building between a lawyer's practice and an assayer's shop. The sign on the door read Marcus Webb, Geological Surveys and Water Analysis. Evelyn tied the horse and climbed the stairs, her heart pounding. This was it. The moment when she'd find out if everything she'd risked meant anything at all. She knocked. "Come in," a voice called. The office was cramped but organized, filled with maps, rock samples, and surveying equipment. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from a chart he was studying and blinked in surprise. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Webb, my name is Evelyn Harper. Sheriff Collins from Brennan's Cross sent me. I need your help verifying something important." Webb set down his pen. "Collins, you say? Haven't heard from him in years. How is the old bastard?" "Holding off a land grabber and protecting a wanted man on my behalf, which is why I need your help quickly." That got Webb's full attention. "You better sit down and explain." Evelyn sat and told him everything, starting with Thomas's obsession and ending with her midnight escape from Brennan's Cross. She pulled out the journal and spread it on his desk. Webb listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. When she finished, he picked up the journal and began reading, his fingers tracing Thomas's diagrams and notes. After several minutes, he looked up. "Your husband knew what he was doing. These measurements are precise. The geological analysis is sound. If this is accurate, you're talking about a significant underground aquifer, possibly fed by snowmelt from the mountains." "So it's real?" "The data suggests it could be, but data isn't proof. I'd need to survey the site myself to confirm." "We don't have time for that. Hale is already searching for the spring, and he's got men looking for me. If I go back before I have legal protection, then you'll lose everything, including possibly your life." Webb removed his glasses and cleaned them with a handkerchief. "Mrs. Harper, I understand your urgency, but if you file a water rights claim based solely on this journal, Hale's lawyers will tear it apart. They'll say it's biased, unverified, the work of an amateur. You need independent confirmation from a recognized expert. That's why I came to you. And I can provide that confirmation, but only after I've examined the site. There's no shortcut here." Evelyn felt desperation clawing at her. How long would a survey take? To do it properly, 2 days minimum. 1 to get there and conduct the initial survey, 1 to verify and document the findings. "I don't have 2 days. Hale could what?" Find the spring on his own? Webb shook his head. Mrs. Harper, look at these notes. Your husband marked at least 24 potential drilling sites. Even with unlimited resources, it would take Hale weeks to excavate all of them. The fact that you've seen surface evidence at one location gives us an advantage, but only if we use it properly. He was right, and Evelyn knew it, but the thought of leaving Boone in that cell, leaving Collins to face Hale alone for 2 more days? There's another issue, Webb continued, flipping through the journal. Even if we confirm the spring exists, establishing independent water rights is going to be complicated. Idaho territorial law is murky on this. Some judges have ruled that water found on a property belongs to the landowner. Others have said significant water sources can be claimed separately for public benefit. It depends on the judge, the specific circumstances, and frankly, who has the better lawyer. So what do I do? Webb stood and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out several thick folders. We file a dual claim. First, we petition for an emergency geological survey on the grounds of potential public resource discovery. That gives us legal cover to access the site, even though you don't own it. Second, we file a provisional water rights claim based on your husband's documentation, with the understanding that it will be verified by my survey. Will that protect the spring? It'll create a legal record and buy time. If Hale tries to develop the spring before the matter is settled, he'll be in violation of the claim and could face penalties. It won't stop him completely, but it'll slow him down and force everything into the open where public opinion and legal process can work. Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. How quickly can we file? The Territorial Land Office is 2 blocks from here. If we go now, we can have the paperwork submitted before they close at 4. He checked his pocket watch. That gives us 2 hours. They spent the next 90 minutes in a whirlwind of legal forms and technical documentation. Webb drafted the survey petition with practiced efficiency, citing territorial codes and previous precedents. Evelyn signed documents, provided sworn statements, and answered endless questions from the clerk at the land office. The clerk, a pinch-faced man with suspicious eyes, read through everything twice. This is highly irregular. You're claiming water rights on property you don't own? We're claiming the right to survey a potential public water source, Webb corrected. The ownership of any discovered resource will be determined by the courts after the survey is complete. Mr. Hale isn't going to like this. Mr. Hale's preferences aren't relevant to territorial law, Webb said coolly. Are the documents in order or not? The clerk sniffed but began stamping the papers. They're in order, but you should know that Mr. Hale has considerable influence in Boise. If he decides to contest this, then he can file his contest through proper legal channels like everyone else. They left the land office with official copies of the filed documents and walked back toward Webb's office. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. What happens now? Evelyn asked. Now I pack my equipment and we leave for Brennan's Cross at first light. The sooner I can verify that spring, the stronger your claim becomes. Webb glanced at her. You should stay here tonight. Get a proper meal and a full night's sleep. You look like you're about to collapse. I need to get back. My friend, your friend will be safer if you're rested and thinking clearly. Collins is a good man and a capable sheriff. He'll hold the line for one more night. Evelyn wanted to argue, but her body was already making the decision for her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past 48 hours was finally giving out, leaving behind exhaustion so profound she could barely stand. Webb seemed to recognize this. There's a boarding house 3 streets over, run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. Tell her I sent you. She'll give you a room and won't ask questions. Thank you for everything. Thank me when this is over and that water is flowing where it's meant to. He tipped his hat. I'll meet you at the boarding house at dawn. We'll make good time if we leave early. Evelyn found Mrs. Chen's boarding house exactly where Webb said it would be. The proprietor was a compact Chinese woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. When Evelyn explained that Webb had sent her, Mrs. Chen simply nodded and showed her to a small, clean room on the 2nd floor. Bath is down the hall, Mrs. Chen said. Supper is at 6 if you want it. Otherwise, rest. The room had a real bed with clean sheets, a wash basin with actual running water, and a window that looked out over a garden. Evelyn sat on the bed and felt tears suddenly streaming down her face. Tears of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming gratitude for simple kindness from strangers. She allowed herself 5 minutes to cry. Then she washed, changed into the one clean dress she'd packed, and went downstairs for supper. The dining room held 4 other boarders, a traveling salesman, 2 minors passing through, and a school teacher. They nodded politely but didn't pry, and Evelyn was grateful for the anonymity. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow. After supper, she returned to her room and lay down, expecting her churning thoughts to keep her awake. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately and didn't wake until Mrs. Chen knocked on the door at dawn. "Your friend is here," Mrs. Chen said through the door. "And you have another visitor." Evelyn dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Webb in the front room with his surveying equipment packed and ready. Standing next to him was Sheriff Collins. Evelyn stopped halfway down the stairs, her heart lurching. "What are you doing here? What happened? Is Boone—" "Boone's alive," Collins said quickly. "But the situation has changed. Hale brought in a bounty hunter last night, a man named Kane, out of Wyoming. He's got the legal paperwork to take Boone into custody." "You can't let him—" "I can't stop him, not without violating territorial law myself." Collins' face was grim. "I delayed as long as I could, but Kane's filing a formal complaint this morning. Once that's on record, I'll have to release Boone to him." "When?" "Noon, maybe earlier if Hale pushes hard enough." Evelyn looked at Webb. "We need to leave now." "Already packed," Webb confirmed. "But Mrs. Harper, even if we ride hard, we won't make it back by noon. It's a full day's journey." "Then we make it by tonight. We get the survey done and get the documentation back to Brennan's Cross before Kane can take Boone out of Collins's jurisdiction." She turned to the sheriff. "Can you delay until tonight?" "I can try. But Evelyn, you need to understand something. Even if we get the survey, even if we prove the spring exists, it doesn't change the bounty on Boone. Kane has every legal right to collect it." "Unless Boone never killed anyone," Evelyn said quietly. Collins frowned. "What?" "Boone told me he shot Pike Garrett, but what if there's more to that story? What if the bounty is based on false information? That's a hell of a gamble." "Everything about this is a gamble." Evelyn moved toward the door. "But if we can expose Hale's attempt to steal the water, if we can show a pattern of corruption and abuse, maybe that opens the door to questioning other things, like whether the bounty on Boone was legitimate or just another example of powerful men bending the law to suit themselves." Webb was already heading for the door. Philosophical discussions later, riding now. They left Boise as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, 3 riders pushing their horses hard toward Brennan's Cross. Collins had brought a spare mount, and they rotated the animals to maintain speed without breaking them down. They made good time through the morning, but as noon approached, Evelyn found herself watching the sun's position with increasing anxiety. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to Kane taking Boone into custody, an hour closer to losing everything they'd fought for. Around 1 o'clock, they stopped briefly at a creek to water the horses. Webb was studying his maps, comparing them to Thomas's journal. "If the spring is where your husband believed it was, we should be able to confirm it with relatively simple testing. I'll need to take water samples, measure the flow rate, and document the geological formations. 2 hours, 3 at most. And then? Then I write up a preliminary report, sign it, and you take it to the judge in Brennan's Cross. The full survey can be completed later, but the preliminary findings should be enough to formalize your claim." They remounted and rode on. The landscape began to look familiar. The rolling hills, the distant line of mountains, the particular quality of light that Evelyn had seen every day for 23 years. They were getting close. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from Brennan's Cross on the horizon. Collins urged his horse forward, pulling ahead slightly. "I'll go straight to the office and try to stall Kane. You two head for Devil's Tooth and do what needs doing. When you're finished, come find me." He looked at Evelyn. "No matter what's happening, you finish that survey. Understood?" "What if Kane has already—" "Then it's too late anyway, and the only thing that matters is making sure the spring is protected. Don't waste what Boone bought you with his time." He rode ahead, leaving Evelyn and Webb to approach the property from the northeast, staying off the main road. As they got closer to Devil's Tooth, Evelyn's anxiety ratcheted up another notch. What if Hale had posted guards? What if they'd already started digging? But when the rock formation came into view, it had stood alone and undisturbed, just as it had been 2 days before. They dismounted and approached on foot. Webb immediately began working with the focused intensity of a professional. He examined the crack in the rock where Evelyn had seen moisture, took samples of the soil, and used a handheld drill to extract core samples at various depths. He worked mostly in silence, occasionally muttering measurements to himself and making notes in a leather-bound field book. Evelyn kept watch, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for riders. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows across the land. Somewhere in town, Collins was fighting to buy them time. Somewhere in that cell, Boone was waiting to learn his fate. "Mrs. Harper," Webb said suddenly, "come look at this." She moved to where he'd excavated a small test hole about 3 feet deep. At the bottom, water was seeping in, pooling faster than the loose soil could absorb it. "It's flowing," Webb said, and there was excitement in his voice now. "Not just groundwater from yesterday's rain. This is sustained flow from a pressurized source below." He moved to another spot and began digging. Within minutes, the same thing happened, water welling up from below, clear and cold. "Your husband was right," Webb said, looking up at her. "There's a significant aquifer here, probably fed by underground channels from the mountains. Based on the flow rate and pressure, I'd estimate it could support irrigation for several hundred acres, possibly more." Evelyn felt her knees go weak. "You're sure?" "I'm sure enough to stake my professional reputation on it, which is exactly what I'm about to do." He pulled out his field book and began writing rapidly, documenting everything he'd observed and measured. "This is preliminary, but it's solid. No judge will dismiss this as speculation." He worked for another hour as the sun touched the western horizon, taking photographs with a bulky camera, measuring flow rates, and documenting the geological formations. Finally, he stood and brushed dirt from his hands. "It's done. I'll write up the full report over the next few days, but what I've got here is enough to support your claim." He handed her the field book. "Guard this with your life. It's proof that changes everything." They rode hard for Brennan's Cross, arriving as dusk settled over the town. The main street was crowded, more people than Evelyn had seen during her previous visit. Word had apparently spread that something was happening, and the townspeople had gathered to watch. The sheriff's office was surrounded. Evelyn pushed through the crowd and found Collins standing on the front steps, facing down Victor Hale and a man who could only be Kane, tall, weathered, with the patient eyes of someone who'd spent years tracking desperate people. "This is the law, Sheriff," Kane was saying. "I have a valid warrant, and you've delayed long enough." "I'm not disputing your warrant," Collins said evenly. "I'm asking for time to verify it's being executed properly." "You've had all day. Now step aside or I'll file a complaint against you for obstruction." "File whatever you want. I'm not moving until—" "Until what?" Hale cut in. His voice was smooth, confident. "Until Mrs. Harper returns with some fantasy about hidden springs? She's not coming back, Sheriff. She's probably halfway to Oregon by now, and you've been played for a fool." "Is that so?" Evelyn called out, stepping forward. The crowd parted for her. "Because I'm standing right here, Mr. Hale, and I've got something you're not going to like." Hale turned, and for just a moment his composure cracked. Then he smiled. "Mrs. Harper, how convenient. Perhaps you can clear up this matter of the stolen journal you took from my property." I took nothing from your property. The journal belonged to my husband and now belongs to me, and the information it contains has just been verified by a licensed territorial surveyor." She pulled out Webb's field book and held it up. "There is a massive underground spring on the land you purchased, and as of this afternoon I filed a legal claim to the water rights independent of the land ownership." The crowd murmured. Hale's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure you filed something, Mrs. Harper, but claims can be contested, especially when they're based on fraudulent—" "There's nothing fraudulent about it," Webb said, stepping forward. "I'm Marcus Webb, territorial surveyor. I've just completed a preliminary geological survey of the site in question, and I can confirm the existence of a significant aquifer precisely where Mrs. Harper's documentation indicated it would be. My findings are a matter of public record as of this afternoon." Hale's expression hardened. "Your findings are preliminary, as you said, hardly conclusive. Conclusive enough to support a water rights claim. Conclusive enough to require a full judicial review before any development can proceed. and conclusive enough to make this matter very public, very complicated, and very expensive for anyone who tries to claim sole ownership. Webb pulled out a document and handed it to Collins. Sheriff, this is a copy of the claim as filed with the Territorial Land Office. Mrs. Harper has legal standing to access that property for further surveying, and any interference with that right is a violation of territorial code. Collins took the document and read it quickly. When he looked up, there was something like satisfaction in his eyes. Appears everything is in order, Mr. Hale. You'll need to respect the surveyor's access rights until a judge rules otherwise. Hale was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Kane. Take Boone into custody. At least we can conclude that piece of business. About that, Collins said. There's been a complication. Everyone turned to look at him. While you were all out here posturing, I received a telegram from the Territorial Marshal's office in Wyoming. Collins pulled a paper from his pocket. Seems there's some question about the validity of the warrant for Silas Boone. New evidence has come to light suggesting Pike Garrett's death might not have been murder after all. Kane's eyes narrowed. What kind of evidence? The kind that requires the warrant to be reviewed before any arrest can proceed, which means Boone stays in my custody until Wyoming sends clarification. That's convenient timing, Hale said coldly. Isn't it? Collins met his gaze without flinching. Almost like someone up there finally decided to look at the actual facts instead of just taking a rich man's word for what happened. The crowd was buzzing now, sensing blood in the water. Evelyn felt hope surging in her chest, almost painful in its intensity. Hale looked around at the gathered townspeople, at the sheriff standing firm, at Evelyn with her surveyor and her documents. For the first time since this began, he was on the defensive. This isn't over, he said quietly. I have lawyers, I have resources. I will fight this claim in court for as long as it takes. You're welcome to try, Evelyn said. But now everyone knows about the spring. Now there's a public record, and now people will be watching to see what you do with it, whether you use it to help this valley or squeeze every last dollar out of desperate farmers. Hale's jaw tightened. Then he turned and walked away, his men following. Kane hesitated, then followed as well, clearly unwilling to proceed without clear legal authority. The crowd began to disperse, people talking excitedly among themselves. Webb clapped Evelyn on the shoulder. You did it. The claim will hold. Collins unlocked the office door. Boone's going to want to hear this. They went inside, and there was Silas Boone standing at the cell bars with an expression of cautious hope on his face. When he saw Evelyn, something in his eyes went soft. You came back, he said. I promised I would. Collins unlocked the cell. You're free to go, Boone, for now anyway. Wyoming needs time to review the warrant, and until they do, you're not under arrest in my jurisdiction. Boone stepped out, flexing his shoulders. How long do I have? Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks, but I'd suggest you use the time wisely. Boone looked at Evelyn. The spring? It's real. Everything Thomas said was real, and it's protected now. Or at least protected enough that Hale can't just take it. For the first time since she'd met him, Silas Boone smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost peaceful. Thomas would be proud of you, he said quietly. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. We need to finish this. File the full survey, make everything official, make sure the water goes where it's supposed to go. Then let's get to work, Webb said, because morning's coming, and with it, Hale's lawyers. They worked through the night in the sheriff's office, drafting documents and preparing for the legal battle ahead. But for the first time in longer than Evelyn could remember, she felt something that had been missing for too long. She felt hope. Dawn came cold and clear, finding 4 people still awake in the sheriff's office, surrounded by maps and legal documents and the dregs of coffee that had gone bitter hours ago. Webb was making final notations in his report. Collins was writing letters to contacts in the territorial government. Boone stood at the window, watching the street come to life. And Evelyn sat at the desk, reading through the water rights claim one more time, making sure every word was exactly right. The knock came at 6:30, sharp and authoritative. Collins opened the door to find a well-dressed man in his 40s holding a leather briefcase. Sheriff Collins, I'm Harold Pritchard, attorney for Victor Hale. I'm here to discuss the matter of the disputed water claim. Kind of early for legal discussions, Collins observed. My client is eager to resolve this matter quickly and fairly. May I come in? Collins stepped aside. Pritchard entered, took in the assembled group with practiced assessment, and set his briefcase on the desk. Mrs. Harper, I presume, and Mr. Webb, the surveyor. Excellent. This will save time. He pulled out several documents and spread them before Evelyn. My client is prepared to make you a generous offer, $20,000 for the journal, the survey results, and your agreement to withdraw the water rights claim. In addition, Mr. Hale will guarantee you free access to water from the spring for any property you purchase in the valley in perpetuity. The room went silent. $20,000 was more money than Evelyn had seen in her entire life. It was security, freedom, the ability to start over somewhere safe. No, she said. Pritchard blinked. Perhaps you didn't hear the amount. 20,000. I heard you. The answer is no. Mrs. Harper, be reasonable. The legal battle ahead will cost you everything you have and likely more. Mr. Hale has unlimited resources. Even if by some miracle you win, the process will take years. You'll die poor and broken. And for what? Pride? For something bigger than money, Evelyn said quietly. For what my husband believed in. For every farmer in this valley who needs water to survive. For the principle that some things shouldn't be owned by one man just because he has deeper pockets. Pritchard sighed and pulled out another set of papers. Very well. Then let me present you with the reality of your situation. Mr. Hale purchased the land in question legally and in good faith. Under territorial law, all natural resources found on that land, including water, belong to the landowner unless explicitly exempted in the sale. Since your deed made no mention of water rights, they defaulted to Mr. Hale upon purchase. That's one interpretation, Webb interjected. But territorial code also recognizes the doctrine of public benefit. Water sources of significant size can be claimed independently if they serve the common good. A doctrine that's been challenged successfully in 3 separate cases in the past 2 years, Pritchard countered, and in each case, the courts ruled in favor of the landowner. Those cases involved springs that could be contained within property boundaries. This aquifer likely extends beyond the boundaries of Hale's land. That changes the legal calculation considerably. Pritchard smiled thinly. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, you have a preliminary survey based on 1 afternoon of field work. Mr. Hale can bring in a dozen surveyors who will testify that your findings are inconclusive at best. And even if the water does extend beyond the property lines, proving it requires extensive geological surveys that will cost more than Mrs. Harper could afford in 3 lifetimes. Unless, Sishat, Collins said from his position by the door, someone else pays for those surveys. Someone with a vested interest in seeing the water used for public benefit. And who might that be? The territorial government, for one. I've already sent telegrams to officials in the capital, informing them of the discovery and requesting a full geological assessment. They have the authority to conduct such surveys in the interest of territorial development. Pritchard's smile faded slightly. That's a lengthy process with no guaranteed outcome. True. But it's a process that happens publicly, with citizen oversight and newspaper coverage, which means everyone will be watching to see what Victor Hale does with this water while the surveys are ongoing. Hard to squeeze farmers when the whole territory is paying attention. The lawyer was quiet for a moment, reassessing. Then he turned back to Evelyn. Let me ask you something, Mrs. Harper. What exactly do you think happens if you win? Even if the courts grant you the water rights, you don't have the capital to develop them. No irrigation infrastructure, no distribution system, nothing. The water stays in the ground, useless to everyone. At least Mr. Hale has the resources to actually put it to use. To use it to control people, Boone said from the window. To charge whatever he wants and own every farmer for miles around. That's not development, that's extortion. Pritchard turned to look at him for the first time. And you are? Nobody important, just someone who's seen what happens when men like Hale get control of water. Seen whole communities destroyed, families starved out, good people crushed under debt they can never repay. You can dress it up in legal language all you want, but we both know what this is really about. What it's about, Pritchard said coldly, is property law and legitimate business interests. Mr. Boone, is it? I understand you're here under somewhat questionable circumstances yourself. Perhaps you should focus on your own legal problems before involving yourself in others. My legal problems are being sorted out, Boone said. But since you brought it up, let's talk about questionable circumstances. Let's talk about how Hale heard about this spring in the first place. Who told him? How did he know to make an offer on dried-up farmland worth maybe $1,000, but offer 3 times that amount? Someone fed him information, and I'd bet my life it wasn't public knowledge. Pritchard's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. I have no idea what you're implying. I'm implying that Hale has been working this angle for months, maybe longer. Getting information, positioning himself, probably paying off the right people to make sure things went his way. That's not legitimate business. That's corruption. That's a serious accusation with no evidence to support it. Isn't it? Collins moved away from the door, pulling out a folder. Because I've been doing some digging of my own. Turns out Hale made similar purchases in 3 other counties over the past 5 years. Each time, he bought land that seemed worthless but turned out to have valuable resources. Each time, the previous owners sold for far less than the land was worth. And each time, Hale somehow knew exactly what was under the ground before anyone else did. He dropped the folder on the desk. Now maybe that's just good business instincts. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's worth investigating how a man keeps getting so lucky. Pritchard stood abruptly. Sheriff, if you're suggesting my client is engaged in illegal activity, I'd advise you to be very careful. Slander is a serious offense. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just stating facts and asking questions. But you're right that we should be careful, which is why I've sent copies of all this information to the Territorial Marshal's Office, the Land Claims Bureau, and a friend of mine who writes for the Boise newspaper. If there's nothing improper here, then Hale has nothing to worry about. But if there is something, Collins shrugged. Well, sunlight's the best disinfectant, as they say. The lawyer's jaw tightened. He gathered his papers and stuffed them back into his briefcase. This conversation is over. Mr. Hale will see you in court, Mrs. Harper, and I promise you by the time this is finished, you'll wish you'd taken his generous offer. He strode out, the door slamming behind him. Webb let out a low whistle. You just made a very powerful enemy, Sheriff. I made that enemy the day I refused to look the other way, Collins replied. At least now we're fighting in the open. Evelyn felt her hands shaking and clasped them together to still them. What happens now? Now we wait for Hale's next move, Collins said. But we also keep moving forward. Webb, you finished that full survey. Mrs. Harper, you work with the Territorial Land Office to formalize the claim. And we make sure every step is documented and public. What about the spring itself? Boone asked. Hale still owns the land. What's to stop him from just digging it up while we're tied up in legal battles? The court injunction that Webb and I are going to file this morning, Collins said, requesting that all development on the disputed site be halted pending judicial review. Won't stop Hale completely, but it'll slow him down. They worked through the morning, drafting the injunction and preparing for the fight ahead. Around noon, word came that Judge Morrison, the circuit judge who handled land disputes in this part of the territory, would be arriving in Brennan's Cross the following week to hear preliminary arguments. That's fast, Webb observed. Usually takes months to get a hearing. Morrison's fair and he doesn't like his time wasted, Collins said. Once he heard there was a major water dispute with questions of public interest, he bumped it up the schedule. Or Hale greased the right palms to get a quick ruling in his favor, Boone muttered. Maybe. But Morrison's also a man who cares about his reputation. If he even suspects Hale is trying to manipulate the process, he'll come down hard. Our job is to make sure everything we present is rock solid and above reproach. The week that followed was a blur of preparation. Webb completed his full geological survey, working 16-hour days to document every aspect of the aquifer. Evelyn met with a lawyer in Boise, a sharp young woman named Catherine Mills who specialized in water rights cases, and agreed to take the case in exchange for a percentage of any future water revenues. Together they built their argument. The spring was a natural resource of significant public benefit. It extended beyond Hale's property boundaries, and Thomas Harper's documentation predated Hale's purchase, establishing prior knowledge and intent to claim the water rights separately. Hale, meanwhile, was not idle. His lawyers filed countermotions, brought in their own surveyors, and launched a campaign in the local papers painting Evelyn as a greedy widow trying to profit from her dead husband's delusions. Several townspeople who'd initially supported her cause suddenly became scarce, their courage wilting under pressure from Hale's business interests. But others held firm. The families who'd been struggling to irrigate their farms with inadequate water showed up at the courthouse on the day of the hearing, standing in silent support. The shopkeepers who'd seen Hale's methods up close whispered encouragement, and Colin stood beside Evelyn every step of the way, his presence a reminder that not everyone could be bought or intimidated. Judge Morrison arrived on a Tuesday morning, a stern man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. The hearing was held in the largest room available, the community hall, because the regular courthouse was too small to accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. Hale sat at one table with Pritchard and two other lawyers, looking confident and relaxed. Evelyn sat at the other with Catherine Mills, fighting to keep her hands steady. Behind them, the hall was packed with people from across the valley, all of them waiting to learn the fate of the water that could change their lives. Judge Morrison gavelled the room to order and peered at the assembled parties over his reading glasses. "I've reviewed the filings from both sides. This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether there's sufficient cause to grant the injunction requested by Mrs. Harper, and whether her water rights claim has legal merit. We're not deciding ownership today, just whether this matter deserves a full trial. Is that clear?" Both sides acknowledged understanding. "Very well. Mr. Pritchard, you may begin." Pritchard stood and laid out Hale's case with smooth precision. The land was legally purchased. The deed transferred all rights, including mineral and water. There was no exemption for natural resources, and therefore anything found on the property belonged to the current owner. He argued that Evelyn's claim was an attempt to retroactively change the terms of a sale she'd already agreed to, motivated by regret and greed. Furthermore, Your Honor, the surveyor's report that Mrs. Harper relies upon is based on preliminary findings, not comprehensive analysis. My client has obtained assessments from 3 independent geological experts who contest Mr. Webb's conclusions. They will testify that the water source in question is likely a seasonal accumulation from recent rainfall, not a permanent aquifer as claimed. Catherine Mills rose to respond. Your Honor, with respect to counsel's arguments, the law is clear that water sources of significant size and public benefit can be claimed independently of land ownership under Territorial Code Section 47. The question isn't whether water was mentioned in the deed, it's whether the water source is substantial enough to qualify for independent protection. "And is it?" Morrison asked. "The evidence overwhelmingly suggests yes. Mr. Webb's survey documented consistent flow from multiple test sites, geological formations consistent with a major aquifer, and water quality suitable for agricultural use. The seasonal rainfall theory put forward by Mr. Hale's experts doesn't account for the pressure and volume observed." Morrison looked at Webb. "Mr. Webb, you're willing to testify to your findings under oath?" Webb stood. "I am, Your Honor, and I'd be happy to explain the technical details if the court wishes." "I'm sure you would. But in the interest of time, let me ask you this. In your professional opinion, is there a significant and permanent water source at the location in question?" "Yes, Your Honor. Based on my survey and my 20 years of experience as a geological surveyor, I believe there is a substantial underground aquifer at that site, one capable of supporting agricultural irrigation for several hundred acres, possibly more." Morrison made a note. "And the seasonal rainfall theory?" "Inconsistent with the observed flow rates and pressure. Seasonal accumulation would show signs of depletion over time. The sources I tested showed steady, consistent output suggesting a pressurized aquifer fed by underground channels from the mountain snowmelt." Pritchard stood. "Your Honor, with respect to Mr. Webb's credentials, he conducted his survey in the span of 2 days. My client's experts spent a week at the site and reached different conclusions." "Different conclusions or contradictory ones?" Morrison asked sharply. "I'm not sure I follow, Your Honor. Do your experts claim there's no water there at all, or do they simply disagree about its size and permanence?" Pritchard hesitated. "They believe any water present is likely limited in scope and seasonal in nature. So they acknowledge there is water. Yes, but then the question becomes one of degree, not existence, which means Mrs. Harper's claim has at least prima facie merit." Morrison turned to Evelyn. Mrs. Harper, stand up, please. Evelyn rose, her heart pounding. Why are you doing this? Morrison asked. And I want the truth, not what your lawyer told you to say. You could have sold that journal to Mr. Hale for a considerable sum. You could have walked away clean. Why didn't you? Evelyn took a breath, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on her. Because my husband spent the last 5 years of his life looking for that water, Your Honor. Not to get rich, not to own anyone, but because he believed it could help people, farmers struggling to grow crops, families trying to build something in this valley. He wanted the water to belong to everyone who needed it, not to whoever had the most money to control it. Noble sentiments, but sentiments don't pay legal fees or develop infrastructure. No, they don't. But they matter anyway. Because if we only protect what's profitable, if we only value what makes someone rich, then what's the point of having laws at all? The law is supposed to protect the weak from the strong, the many from the few. That's what I'm asking for, not ownership, not profit, just the chance to make sure this water helps the people who need it instead of being used to control them. The room was absolutely silent. Morrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Hale. Mr. Hale, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Hale stood smoothly. Only that I'm a businessman, Your Honor, not a villain. I purchased land legally and intend to develop its resources responsibly. If there is water there, I have every intention of making it available to the community, at fair market rates, of course. But the suggestion that I would somehow abuse this resource or use it to harm people is both insulting and unfounded. Fair market rates, Morrison repeated. And who determines what's fair? The market does, Your Honor. Supply and demand, same as any commodity. Water isn't a commodity, Mr. Hale. It's a necessity of life. There's a difference. With respect, Your Honor, that's a philosophical distinction. In practical terms, Mr. Hale, I've seen what happens when men like you control resources that people need to survive. I've seen the debt, the desperation, the families driven off their land. And I've learned to be very skeptical when someone claims they're just conducting business as usual. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm granting the injunction. No development of the disputed water source until this matter is fully resolved. Both parties will have 90 days to prepare their cases for a full trial, at which point we'll determine the legal ownership and usage rights for the water. Pritchard shot to his feet. Your Honor, that's an extraordinary restriction on my client's property rights. Your client's alleged property rights, Morrison corrected, which are very much in dispute. And until that dispute is settled, I'm not going to allow irreversible development that might prejudice the outcome. The injunction stands. He gavelled the hearing closed and stood. The hall erupted in conversation, some people cheering, others muttering angrily. Hale's face was carved from stone as he conferred with his lawyers. Catherine Mills gripped Evelyn's arm. We won the first round, but this is far from over. I know. Over the next 3 months, the case consumed Evelyn's life. She met with lawyers, provided depositions, helped Webb prepare detailed geological reports. Money was a constant worry. Even with Mills working on contingency, there were court fees, surveying costs, and basic living expenses. She sold what little she had left and took work where she could find it, cleaning houses and mending clothes to make ends meet. Boone stayed close, working odd jobs around town and watching her back. The warrant from Wyoming remained in limbo. Collins had sent documentation to the territorial marshal raising questions about Garrett's death, and the marshal had agreed to review the case before authorizing any arrest. It wasn't freedom, but it was breathing room. Meanwhile, Hale's lawyers attacked from every angle. They challenged Webb's credentials, questioned Evelyn's mental state, and argued that Thomas's obsession with the spring was evidence of instability rather than expertise. They brought in witnesses who claimed Thomas had been known as a dreamer and a failure. They painted Evelyn as a desperate widow clinging to fantasy. But Catherine Mills fought back just as hard. She presented testimony from farmers who'd consulted with Thomas about water sources and found his advice sound. She brought in geological experts who supported Webb's findings. And she built a case not just on law, but on equity, the fundamental fairness of allowing one man to monopolize a resource that an entire community needed. The trial began on a cold November morning. The community hall was packed again, but this time the crowd was different. Newspaper reporters from Boise and beyond, officials from the territorial government, and representatives from farming communities across the region who'd heard about the case and understood its implications. The trial lasted 4 days. Experts testified and were cross-examined. Documents were presented and challenged. Evelyn sat through it all, watching her husband's life's work and her own desperate gamble be picked apart and scrutinized by strangers. On the 4th day, Judge Morrison called both parties to stand for his ruling. I've listened to 4 days of testimony, reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation, and spent considerable time thinking about the principles at stake here. This case presents a fundamental question. When natural resources are discovered on private property, who has the right to control them? The landowner who happens to own the surface, or the community that depends on those resources for survival? He paused, looking at both tables. The law in this territory is not entirely clear on this matter, which is why we're here. But I believe the spirit of the law favors preservation of resources that serve the common good, especially when those resources are essential to life and community development. Evelyn felt her breath catch. Therefore, I'm ruling in favor of Mrs. Harper's claim. The underground aquifer documented by Mr. Webb constitutes a natural resource of significant public benefit. Water rights to that source will be granted to a community trust to be established under territorial oversight, with the explicit purpose of providing water access to farmers and residents of this valley at cost, not profit. The hall erupted. People were shouting, some in joy, some in anger. Hale was on his feet, his face flushed. Pritchard was already filing papers. Morrison gavelled for order. Mr. Hale, you retain ownership of the land itself and have every right to develop it as you see fit, provided that development doesn't interfere with the Water Trust's access to the spring. Mrs. Harper, the trust will be administered by a board of local residents, and you'll have a seat on that board but not sole control. This water belongs to everyone, not to any one person. He looked directly at Evelyn. Your husband's work is vindicated, Mrs. Harper. I hope you use this victory wisely. The gavel came down one final time, and it was over. Evelyn stood in a daze as people surged around her, shaking her hand and offering congratulations. Catherine Mills was beaming. Webb was laughing with relief. And through it all, Evelyn felt Thomas's presence like a hand on her shoulder, proud and steady. She pushed through the crowd to where Boone stood near the back of the hall. He was smiling, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. You did it, he said quietly. We did it. None of this would have happened without you. I didn't do much except provide moral support and worry a lot. You did more than that. You believed in it when I wasn't sure I could. You stood by me when it would have been easier to walk away. She reached out and took his hand. Thank you, Silas. His expression softened. What happens now? Before she could answer, Collins appeared, looking uncharacteristically pleased. There's someone here to see you, Boone. From Wyoming. Boone's face went guarded. The bounty hunter? Not quite. A woman in her 30s stepped forward, wearing traveling clothes and carrying a satchel. She had kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Mr. Boone? I'm Sarah Jensen. My father was William Jensen, the man Pike Garrett killed 3 years ago. Little Boone went very still. I remember your father. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for yours too. I know you were friends. She opened her satchel and pulled out a folder. After Garrett died, his business partners tried to continue his practices. But without him, the whole operation fell apart. People started talking, sharing stories they'd been too afraid to tell while he was alive. And evidence started surfacing about the things he'd done, including my father's murder. She handed the folder to Boone. This is a letter from the Territorial Marshal's office in Wyoming. Based on new testimony and evidence, they've determined that Garrett's death was justifiable. You're no longer wanted for murder. The warrant has been withdrawn. Boone opened the folder with shaking hands and read the letter inside. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. I spent 3 years running, he said hoarsely. 3 years looking over my shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. And now you're telling me it's over. It's over, Sarah confirmed. You're free, Mr. Boone. And on behalf of my family and all the families Garrett hurt, thank you for having the courage to do what the law couldn't. Boone couldn't speak. He just stood there holding the letter while everything he'd carried for so long finally lifted from his shoulders. Evelyn stepped close and put her hand on his arm. "Where will you go?" He looked at her, then at the letter, then back at her. "I don't know. I've spent so long running toward nothing that I forgot what it feels like to have a choice. Then maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to find somewhere to belong." Something passed between them. An understanding, a possibility, the beginning of something neither had expected but both recognized as real. "Yeah," Boone said quietly. "Maybe it is." The winter that followed was the harshest anyone could remember, but it was also a season of transformation. The Community Water Trust was established, with Evelyn serving on the board alongside 5 other valley residents. Webb supervised the drilling of the first access point to the aquifer, and when water finally burst forth from the ground in a silver torrent, half the valley turned out to witness it. The infrastructure took months to build: pipes, distribution channels, irrigation systems. But by the following spring, water was flowing to farms that had been struggling with drought for years. Green began to appear where there had been only brown. Crops that had withered began to thrive. And families who'd been contemplating leaving started talking about staying, about building, about futures instead of just survival. Hale made one final attempt to contest the ruling, taking the case to the territorial Supreme Court. But public opinion had turned decisively against him, and even his lawyers advised him to accept the decision. He sold his holdings in the valley and moved his operations elsewhere, bitter but beaten. Collins remained sheriff, his reputation enhanced by his willingness to stand up to power. Webb's survey became a landmark case study in water rights law. Catherine Mills built a thriving practice representing communities in resource disputes. And Evelyn bought a small plot of land on the eastern edge of the valley, not far from Devil's Tooth. It had a view of the mountains and soil that was finally getting the water it needed to be fertile. She started small: a garden, some chickens, a modest house built with help from neighbors who'd never forgotten what she'd done. Boone helped her build that house. He stayed through the winter, and when spring came and the question of leaving arose, he simply didn't. He took work as a ranch hand, then as a foreman, then eventually bought a small spread of his own adjacent to Evelyn's property. They didn't rush into anything. Both had been alone too long, carried too many scars, to move without caution. But slowly, over shared meals and long conversations and quiet evenings watching the sun set over land that was blooming again, something grew between them. Not the passionate romance of youth, but something deeper. A partnership built on respect, shared purpose, and the recognition of kindred spirits who'd both lost everything and found their way back to something like peace. On a warm evening in June, nearly a year after the trial, Evelyn stood at the edge of her property, looking at the newly installed irrigation channel that brought water from the spring to her fields. The channel sparkled in the fading light, and she could hear the steady rush of water that had once been just her husband's dream. Boone came to stand beside her, his shoulder touching hers. "Thomas would have loved this," she said softly. "He would have. But he'd be proudest of what you did with it, making sure it belonged to everyone instead of just one person." "We did that. All of us together." "Yeah, we did." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water flow. Then Boone said, "I've been thinking." "About?" "About where I belong. About what home means." He turned to look at her. "I spent 3 years running from one place, and the last year running toward another. And somewhere in all that running, I realized I'd already found what I was looking for." Evelyn's heart beat faster. "And what's that?" "A place worth staying for, people worth building something with." He took her hand. "You, Evelyn. You're what I was looking for, even before I knew I was looking." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time, tears of joy and relief and possibility. "You sure? I come with baggage and opinions and a stubborn streak that's gotten me in trouble more times than I can count." "I'm sure. Because you also come with courage and integrity and a heart big enough to fight for an entire valley of strangers. And if you'll have me, if you think a broken-down gunfighter with a past can make a home here, then I'd like to stay. Not as a guest or a hired hand, but as someone who belongs." Evelyn looked at this man who'd risked everything for her, who'd stood beside her through the worst of it, who'd found redemption in helping her fight for something bigger than either of them. She thought about Thomas and the life they'd built together, about the grief she'd carried and the loneliness that had followed. She thought about second chances and new beginnings and the courage it took to open your heart again after it had been broken. "Where will you sleep tonight?" she asked, echoing the question that had started everything. Boone smiled, understanding the significance of the words. "Right here, where I belong." And for the first time in longer than either could remember, they both stopped running. The water continued to flow from the spring beneath Devil's Tooth, cold and clear and constant. It flowed through channels to farms across the valley, turning dry earth fertile, giving life where there had been only struggle. And on summer evenings, families would gather at their wells and irrigation ditches, drawing water that belonged to all of them, remembering the widow who'd fought for it and the gunfighter who'd stood beside her. The valley bloomed. Children grew up with stories of the spring that saved their homes. And through it all, Evelyn and Silas built a life together. Not perfect, but honest and good and theirs. Sometimes standing at the edge of their land in the fading light, Evelyn would think about that day when her wagon broke and her last hope seemed to shatter with it. She'd thought it was an ending. Instead, it had been a beginning, the first step on a journey that led her to purpose, to justice, to love she'd never expected to find again. The spring continued to give, season after season, year after year. And every drop of water that flowed carried with it the legacy of a dreamer who'd believed in something better, a widow who'd had the courage to fight for it, and a community that learned the most valuable things in life can't be owned, only shared. That was the real victory. Not the legal ruling or the public vindication, but the simple truth that when people stand together for what's right, when they refuse to let greed and power dictate the terms of their lives, they can create something that endures long after they're gone. The water flowed, the valley bloomed, and Silas Boone, standing beside Evelyn Harper on land they'd made their own, finally understood what home meant. It wasn't a place you ran to or from. It was the ground you chose to stand on, the people you stood beside, and the courage to say, "This is where I belong, and I'm not leaving." The sun set over the Idaho Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The spring flowed beneath Devil's Tooth, as it had for countless years and would for countless more. And two people who'd found each other in the midst of chaos stood together, watching the land they'd fought for turn green with promise. They were home,